I'll never forget the sound of 300 people laughing at me all at once. It was my daughter's wedding reception, the one I'd been dreaming about since she was born. The Crystal Gardens ballroom sparkled under chandeliers that cost more than my annual rent. Everyone wore designer clothes, the kind I only saw in magazines or stitched together in my tiny workshop for other people to wear. I sat at table 19, so far from the main family seating that I needed binoculars to see my own daughter cutting the cake. Clinton Graves stood at the microphone, champagne glass raised, his teeth too white and his smile too sharp. My new son-in-law. The man who'd just married Elena, my only child, the girl I'd raised alone after Peter died when she was 7. Clinton worked for his father's apparel company, wore watches that could feed a family for months, and had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said, his voice booming through expensive speakers. "Especially those who traveled from far away." His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. My heart lifted for just a second. Maybe he'd acknowledge me after all. Maybe he'd thank me for raising the woman he claimed to love more than life itself. "And I want to give a special shout-out to my new mother-in-law, Margaret," he continued. The room went quiet. I felt my cheeks flush. "She's sitting way back there at table 19 because, well, we needed the front tables for people who actually fit in the chairs." The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then someone laughed. Then someone else. Then the whole room erupted like I was the punchline to a joke I didn't know I was part of. "I mean, we didn't want her breaking anything expensive, right?" Clinton added, grinning wider. "Fat pigs gotta sit where there's reinforced flooring." "Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story." More laughter. Louder this time. I looked for Elena at the head table. My daughter. My baby girl who I'd sewn clothes for when we couldn't afford store-bought ones. Who I'd walked to school every morning because we couldn't afford a car. Who I'd worked double shifts for so she could go to college and meet people like Clinton Graves and never feel poor again. She was looking down at her plate. Not defending me. Not standing up. Just staring at her $50 slice of wedding cake like it held the answers to questions she was too ashamed to ask. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip that table and storm out and never speak to either of them again. But I didn't. I just smiled. That same smile I'd worn when Peter's medical bills piled up. When Elena told me she was embarrassed to bring friends home to our tiny apartment. When the other mothers at school events wore jewelry I could never afford. I smiled and I nodded and I even raised my glass when Clinton finished his speech. Because that's what women like me do. We survive. We endure. We swallow our pride because making a scene would only prove them right. But here's what Clinton and Elena and everyone laughing in that ballroom didn't know. Here's what they couldn't have known because they'd never bothered to look past the worn shoes and the tired eyes and the body that carried the weight of years spent sacrificing everything. I'd been planning something. Something quiet. Something they'd never see coming until it was too late. They thought they broke me that night. What they didn't know was I'd already begun my quiet revenge. Would you have stayed silent in Margaret's place? Or would you have walked out right then and there? Drop your answer in the comments because Margaret's next move is going to change everything. Peter used to say I had hands made for creating miracles. We met when I was 19, working at a fabric store in downtown Philadelphia. He'd come in looking for thread to fix his work jacket, and I'd shown him how to do a proper stitch so it wouldn't come undone. 3 months later, he proposed with a ring he'd saved 6 months to buy. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Our apartment was small, 4th floor walk-up, with pipes that rattled in winter. But we made it home. Peter worked construction, came back every night with dust in his hair and stories that made me laugh until my sides hurt. I took in sewing jobs, hemming dresses and fixing tiers for neighbors who paid whatever they could afford. Sometimes that was money. Sometimes that was a casserole or help with groceries. When Elena was born, Peter cried. Actually cried. He held her like she was made of glass and whispered promises about the life we'd give her. Piano lessons and good schools and vacations to places we'd only seen in books. We were going to make sure she never felt less than anyone. Then Elena turned 7 and Peter started getting headaches. The doctors said it was stress at first. Then they said it was migraines. By the time they figured out it was a brain tumor, it was already stage 4. He died 3 months after the diagnosis, on a Tuesday morning in March. The hospital bills that followed could have buried us twice over. I worked 3 jobs that year. Sewing during the day, cleaning offices at night, and taking weekend shifts at a laundromat. Elena would do her homework at my sewing table, falling asleep to the sound of my machine humming in the dark. I told myself it was temporary, that once we got through the debt, things would get easier. But they never really did. I watched my daughter grow up, ashamed of the life I'd built for us. She stopped inviting friends over, started lying about where we lived. By high school, she'd tell people her mom worked in fashion, which was technically true, but left out the part about me hunched over a table in our living room fixing other people's mistakes for minimum wage. I didn't blame her. She wanted more. Every parent wants their child to want more. I didn't know it then, but the daughter I worked my fingers raw for would one day look at me with shame. Clinton Graves walked into Elena's life like he owned every room before he entered it. She brought him home for dinner on a Sunday. I'd made pot roast, the one meal I knew how to make look fancy, even though it cost $12. He showed up in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, shook my hand with a grip that felt like a test, and smiled with all his teeth showing. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, "Elena's told me so much about you." Funny thing was, I knew she hadn't. Because if she had, he would have known I preferred Margaret. That I hated being called Mrs. Rowan because it reminded me of death certificates and condolence cards. But I smiled and said it was nice to meet him and pretended not to notice the way his eyes swept over our apartment like he was calculating its value and finding it lacking. During dinner, he talked about his father's company. Graves Apparel, third-generation family business, manufacturing clothes for department stores across 6 states. He dropped names of restaurants I'd never been to and mentioned a ski trip to Colorado, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Elena hung on every word, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, touched his arm like she needed to make sure he was real. I watched him watch her, and something cold settled in my stomach. The way he'd pause before answering my questions, like he was deciding how much truth a woman like me deserved. The way he'd correct her grammar mid-sentence, smiling like it was playful, but with edges sharp enough to draw blood. "Your mom's quiet," he said to Elena, like I wasn't sitting right there. "She's always been shy," Elena said quickly. Too quickly. I wasn't shy. I was careful. There's a difference. After dinner, I heard them talking in the hallway while I washed dishes. Clinton's voice carried through thin walls. "You didn't tell me it was this bad," he said. Elena's response was too soft to hear, but I felt it in my chest anyway. And yet, I ignored that chill in my bones, because love makes mothers blind. But that blindness would cost me my dignity. The invitation came in the mail on a Tuesday. Cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of expensive stationery I'd only seen in bridal magazines. Elena had moved in with Clinton 6 months earlier, into a condo his parents helped them buy. I'd seen her maybe 3 times since then, always brief visits where she'd check her phone more than she'd look at me. The envelope had my name handwritten in gold ink. For a moment, I let myself feel special. Chosen. Important. Then I opened it. The wedding was at Crystal Gardens, the most expensive venue in the city. Black tie required. I looked at the date and did quick math in my head, calculating how many extra alterations I'd need to take on to afford a dress nice enough not to embarrass my daughter. I called Elena that night. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Did you get the invitation?" she asked before I could speak. "I did. It's beautiful, honey."
"Good. We sent them out last week."
Clinton's mom handled most of the list. Most of the list. Not all of it. I swallowed the question I wanted to ask. "Do you need help with anything?" "I could do alterations, fix your dress if." "We've got someone for that. A professional." The word hung between us like a wall. "Of course," I said. "Well, let me know if you need anything." "Sure, Mom. I have to go. We're meeting the caterer." She hung up before I could say I loved her. The weeks leading up to the wedding, I tried to be involved. Sent text messages asking about colors and flowers and whether she'd chosen a first dance song. got back one-word answers or nothing at all. When I offered to host a small bridal shower, she said Clinton's mother had already planned something at the country club. I wasn't invited to that either. The day of the wedding, I arrived early. Wore a navy dress I'd spent 2 months sewing, simple but elegant. Pearls that had been my mother's. I'd even gone to a salon for the first time in years to get my hair done. I walked into Crystal Gardens and looked for my name at the seating chart. Table 19. Not table 1 with the parents. Not even table 5 with extended family. Table 19 in the back corner, next to the service entrance and the bathroom. I should have been happy for her. Instead, I felt like a guest in my own child's life. And when I saw my name card at that wedding, far from the family table, I knew exactly where I stood. The humiliation came during the toast. I'd made it through the ceremony without crying, watching Elena walk down the aisle on the arm of Clinton's father, because apparently that's what you do when your own father is dead and your mother isn't good enough. I'd smiled through cocktail hour while Clinton's relatives asked what I did for work, and then found reasons to walk away mid-conversation. I sat at table 19 with people I'd never met. A second cousin of Clinton's who spent the whole dinner on his phone. An elderly aunt who kept asking if I worked for the catering company. 2 college friends of Elena's who didn't bother introducing themselves. Then came the speeches. Clinton's father went first, talking about legacy and family tradition and the importance of marrying the right kind of person. His mother dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief and talked about finally having the daughter she'd always wanted. That one hurt worse than it should have. Then Clinton stood up, grabbed the microphone, flashed that smile I'd learned to hate. He thanked everyone for coming, made a joke about Elena being out of his league. The crowd laughed on cue. Then his eyes found me in the back, and I felt my stomach drop. I also want to thank my new mother-in-law, Margaret, he said. Every head turned. I felt 300 pairs of eyes land on me like weights. She's way back there at table 19 because we needed the front tables for people who actually fit in the chairs. The silence lasted maybe 2 heartbeats. Then someone laughed. A snicker at first, then more, spreading through the room like a disease. We didn't want her breaking anything expensive, right? He grinned wider, feeding off the reaction. Fat pigs gotta sit where there's reinforced flooring. The laughter exploded. Real, cruel, unstoppable laughter. I looked at Elena. My daughter sat frozen, fork halfway to her mouth, eyes wide. But she didn't stand.
Didn't object.
Just sat there while her husband mocked the woman who'd raised her alone. Clinton's parents laughed. His groomsmen doubled over. Even the elderly aunt at my table chuckled into her napkin. Every laugh that echoed that night felt like a nail sealing a coffin. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, or run out the service entrance I was conveniently seated next to. My hands shook. My face burned hot enough to hurt. But I didn't cry. I smiled because in that silence, a plan was born. Would you have stayed silent in Margaret's place? Comment below what you would have done, because what Margaret does next will shock everyone in that room. What Clinton and his family didn't know was that the seamstress they mocked owned the building their company rented. Let me back up. After Peter died, and the medical bills swallowed everything, I had 2 choices. Drown or swim. I chose to swim, but quietly, in waters nobody was watching. I started with small investments. Every extra dollar from my sewing jobs went into stocks I researched at the public library. Companies nobody talked about, but that made products everyone needed. Thread manufacturers. Fabric suppliers. Zipper companies. The unsexy backbone of the fashion industry. 10 years of saving. 10 years of living in that same tiny apartment while Elena begged me to move somewhere nicer. 10 years of saying no to vacations and new furniture and anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. By the time Elena graduated college, I'd built a portfolio worth $700,000. By the time she got engaged, I'd crossed $2 million. Nobody knew. Not Elena, who thought I was still barely scraping by. Not the neighbors who occasionally slipped cash under my door because they felt sorry for me. Not the women at church who donated their old clothes because surely poor Margaret needed charity. I let them think it. Because invisible women hear everything, and powerful women who look powerless can move however they want. 3 years before the wedding, I'd created an LLC. Rowan Holdings. Anonymous, quiet, boring name that nobody would remember. I started buying commercial real estate. Small properties at first, then bigger ones, including the warehouse complex where Graves Apparel had their manufacturing facility and main offices. They'd been renting from a property management company for 15 years. Never knowing that company had been acquired by a quiet seamstress they'd never bothered to meet. They saw a seamstress. I saw an empire in the making. But ownership of their building was just the beginning. 6 months before Elena's wedding, Graves Apparel had started struggling. Bad investments by Clinton's father. Supply chain issues they didn't have the capital to solve. They'd taken on debt, lots of it, and the banks were starting to circle. I watched it all happen through quarterly reports and public filings. Watched them scramble. Watched Clinton's father reach out to potential buyers, trying to find someone who'd acquire the company before it collapsed completely. And soon, that empire would swallow theirs whole. The phone call came 2 weeks after the wedding. I was at my sewing table, working on a christening gown for a client, when my lawyer called. His voice had that careful tone people use when delivering news that'll change everything. "The deal closed this morning," he said. "Rowan Holdings now owns 60% of Graves Apparel. You're the majority shareholder, Margaret. Congratulations." I set down my needle, stared at the wall where I'd hung a photo of Elena's college graduation. She was smiling in that picture, wearing a dress I'd sewn, before Clinton had convinced her that handmade meant cheap. "They don't know yet," my lawyer continued. "The transaction went through an acquisition firm. Your name isn't anywhere public. But they'll figure it out eventually, especially when the board meeting happens next month." "That's fine," I said. My voice sounded calm. Inside, my heart was thunder. Clinton's father had sold to save the company from bankruptcy. He negotiated hard, kept 30% ownership, stayed on as a figurehead president. Probably thought he'd pulled off a miracle deal with mysterious investors who'd let him keep running things. He had no idea those investors answered to a woman he'd laughed at while she sat in the back of his son's wedding reception. I thanked my lawyer and hung up. Sat in the quiet of my apartment, the same apartment I'd lived in for 30 years because it was paid off and safe and nobody expected anything more from Margaret Rowan. Revenge isn't loud. It whispers and waits. That night, Elena called. First time since the wedding. "Mom, Clinton's company is going through some changes," she said. No hello, no asking how I'd been. His dad had to sell part of the business. "It's been really stressful." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "Yeah, well, we might need to cut back on some things. Maybe postpone the honeymoon."
She paused.
"I was wondering if you could loan us some money. Just a few thousand to get through the next couple months." The audacity knocked the breath out of me. 2 weeks ago, her husband called me a fat pig in front of everyone I'd ever meet. Now she wanted my money. "How much do you need?" I asked. "Maybe 5,000? I could have written that check without thinking. Instead, I said, "Let me see what I can do." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." She hung up before I could respond. The next morning, Graves Apparel's CEO got a letter requesting a meeting with a new majority shareholder. The letter included my name. And when the Graves family called asking for a meeting, I almost laughed. Almost. I chose a restaurant Clinton's family loved. The kind of place with cloth napkins and waiters who remembered your name and wines that cost more per glass than I used to make in a day. Clinton's father arrived first. Richard Graves, 62, gray hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that screamed old money. His wife Patricia came next, diamonds at her throat, lips pressed thin like she'd tasted something sour. Then Clinton and Elena. My daughter looked nervous, kept glancing at her phone. Clinton looked annoyed, like this meeting was beneath him. They didn't recognize me at first. I'd worn a designer suit, real jewelry, had my hair done at the salon Elena had recommended once, but never thought I could afford. I looked like money because I was money. I just hadn't bothered showing it before. "Margaret," Elena said, confusion crossing her face. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for the meeting," I said simply. Richard frowned. "I think there's been some mistake. We're meeting with the new owners of Graves Apparel. That's correct. I sat down, smoothed my napkin across my lap. You're meeting with me. The silence that followed was beautiful. That's not possible, Richard said. The acquisition went through Blackstone Holdings. Which is owned by Rowan Holdings, I said. Which is owned by me. I'm the majority shareholder of your family company, Richard. Have been for 2 weeks now. Patricia's face went white. Clinton's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Elena just stared. This is absurd, Richard said, but his voice shook. You're a seamstress. I'm a businesswoman who happens to be skilled with a needle, I corrected. I'm also your landlord, have been for 3 years. And as of 2 weeks ago, I control 60% of your company's voting shares. I pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. Financial statements, acquisition documents, everything proving what I'd just said. Richard grabbed the papers, scanned them, his face turning red, then pale, then red again. Why? He finally asked. Because your son called me a fat pig at his wedding reception. I looked at Clinton, in front of 300 people, while my daughter sat silent. Clinton's confidence shattered. He looked at his father, then at Elena, then back at me. I was just joking. No, you are cruel. And cruelty has consequences. What do you want? Patricia asked. Money? To sell it back. I don't want your money. I have my own. I took a sip of water. What I want is respect. And an apology. A real one. Their silence that night was sweeter than any apology. Elena reached across the table. Mom, I didn't know about any of this. The money, the business. You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed I was poor because I looked poor. You were ashamed of me because I didn't fit into Clinton's world. I kept my voice level. But you're my daughter and I love you. So I'm going to offer you both a choice. I looked at Clinton. You can apologize, mean it, and we can move forward. I'll remain a silent partner in your family business. Or you can keep being who you are, and I'll exercise my majority vote to remove your father from the board and install new management. But that wasn't the end. The true lesson was still waiting for my daughter. If this scene made you smile, hit that like button because Margaret's final move is about to teach everyone the most important lesson of all. Clinton apologized that night at the restaurant, words tumbling out like someone had opened a dam. He was sorry, so sorry, it was the champagne talking. He never meant it, please forgive him. I didn't believe a word. But I nodded and said I accepted, because some battles aren't worth fighting when you've already won the war. Elena called me every day for a week after that dinner. Wanted to talk, to explain, to somehow make sense of a mother she thought she knew but never really saw. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning. Just us, no Clinton, no lawyers, no money talk. Why didn't you tell me, she asked, about the investments, the business, any of it? Would you have believed me? I stirred sugar into my cup. Or would you have thought I was making it up to feel important? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I wanted you to love me for who I was, I said. Not what I had. I wanted to know that when you looked at me, you saw your mother. Not a bank account or a status symbol or a burden to be hidden at table 19. Elena cried then. Real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep and broken. I'm so sorry, Mom. I was awful. I let him be awful. I just wanted to fit in so badly that I forgot where I came from. I know, baby. I reached across the table, held her hand. But you're going to do better now. Both of you. Over the next 6 months, things changed. Clinton actually tried, seemed to understand that his wife's mother could destroy everything his family had built with one phone call. He was polite, respectful, even kind sometimes. Elena started visiting again. Really visiting, not just obligation phone calls. She asked about my business, seemed genuinely interested in the empire I'd built from nothing. But Clinton's pride never fully recovered. I could see it in his eyes every time we met, that resentment simmering beneath forced smiles. His next job promotion required board approval. Guess who controlled the board? I approved it. Gave him the vice president position his father had promised him years ago. But I made him wait 3 months for my signature, just long enough for him to sweat. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. And when Clinton's next job depended on my signature, I took a deep breath and smiled. 5 years have passed since that wedding reception. Elena and Clinton are still married. They have a daughter now, my granddaughter Grace, who's 2 years old and has her grandfather Peter's eyes. Clinton runs the day-to-day operations at Graves Apparel, does a decent job, treats me with a respect that's half genuine and half fear. I still live in the same apartment. Still take sewing jobs, though now it's for fun rather than survival. Still wear simple clothes and shop at regular stores because I never needed luxury to feel valuable. But I also sit on 3 corporate boards. Mentor young women starting their own businesses. Donate quietly to causes that help single mothers and widows who are where I was 30 years ago. Elena tells people her mother is a businesswoman now. Says it with pride, like she's discovered something new. But I'm the same person I always was. The only thing that changed was whether people bothered to look. Last week, Grace asked me to fix her teddy bear. The seam had split and stuffing was coming out. I sat her on my lap, threaded my needle, and showed her how to make small, careful stitches that would hold. "Why do you go so slow, Grandma?" she asked. "Because the slow way is the strong way," I told her.
Fast breaks.
Slow lasts. She didn't understand yet, but someday she will. Sometimes silence speaks louder than thunder. Clinton still doesn't talk much at family dinners. Sits quiet, eats his food, is polite to everyone. His father retired last year, turned the company fully over to professional management that answers to me. Patricia, his mother, died last spring. At her funeral, people talked about her charity work and her grace and her dedication to family. Nobody mentioned that time she laughed when her son called me a fat pig. Maybe they forgot. I didn't. But I said nice things at her service anyway because carrying hate is exhausting and I've carried enough weight in my lifetime. Elena asked me once if I'd planned everything from the beginning. If I'd known, even at the wedding, that I already owned half her husband's world. I knew I was building something, I told her. I didn't know what shape it would take. The truth is, I didn't buy Graves Apparel for revenge. I bought it because it was a good investment and I saw potential where others saw problems. The fact that it also happened to belong to the family that humiliated me was just karma doing what karma does. Because the lips that once mocked you will one day whisper your name with respect or fear. Grace just learned to say my name. She calls me Gamma, can't quite get the R sound yet. When she says it, there's nothing but love in her voice. No shame, no judgment, no calculation of my worth based on what I own or wear or weigh. That's the real victory. Not the money or the power or the moment Clinton's face went white at that restaurant. It's knowing that my granddaughter will grow up understanding that strength comes in quiet packages and real power doesn't need to announce itself. They laughed at her, but she had the last word. If you believe karma never misses its mark, like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more powerful stories like Margaret's. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story, and drop a comment telling us what part of Margaret's journey inspired you most. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. See you in the next one.